Hello guys, welcome back. So we're continuing our example with Clint Barton and his robotics company. So when we left off, he had just seen his actual versus static budget variance report. He was quite shocked to find this unfavorable variance because he thought he had done a really good job meeting the increased demand in units. So we were going to help him sort through this by turning the static budget variance into an actual versus flexible variance report. Okay, so that's what we're going to do right now. I posted a template to help us because #lazy. I did not want to write all of this. So the first thing that you'll notice is that I went ahead and separated the costs based on their behavior, right? I find that to be helpful. So when we look at the static budget variance, we know that some of these are variable and these items are fixed. Okay. And management usually internally likes to separate the two. Why? Because they usually have a little more control over the variable costs, less control over the fixed costs. So that's the first thing I did. The other thing you'll notice is that we don't have sales on here, sales price. Why? Because this is the assembly department, and specifically this report is looking at the overhead costs, right? So that's why we see things such as IM, IL, and other. Okay, so in my new budget report for using the flexible budget, I went ahead and separated them into the variable costs. I also gave myself a reminder that since these are variable costs, I need to know what the amount is per unit because that per unit amount stays constant. So I like to have that there as a reminder. All right, so I have my actual column, my budget column, and again, this is going to be a flexible budget as the name suggests. So we're going to take it from static to flexible. Now, the first thing I told you about a flexible budget variance report is the units are always the same. Okay, so that means there will be no variance between units, which is not the case with a static budget variance report. You can see right away there is a difference, right? That's not going to be the case. Why? Because we want to isolate any change that comes because of volume so that we can truly see the changes due to a increase or a decrease in our costs. That allows for better control, right? And we said that control is something that we need to help our managers with. So we can do that with this report. All right, so how do I find out the per unit amounts? Go back to the static budget. Okay, to figure out your budgeted per unit, take your total variable cost for indirect materials and divide it by your units that were expected, 10,000. So repeat that process only for your variable costs. So do that and then go ahead and indicate it on your template. Okay, so you should get 25 for your indirect material costs per unit, 26 for labor, indirect labor, and 19 for utilities. So you've calculated your per unit, again, based on the static budget. You calculate the per unit based on the static budget. That's usually the main error that I see students making. All right, so now how do we flex it? We take the budgeted per unit and multiply it by the actual units, 12,000. So do 25 times 12,000 to get what you expected for your total indirect material cost. Do it now. All right, you should get 300,000. That one gets a dollar sign since we're moving from units to dollars. 26 times the 12. 312,000 and 19 times the 12,000. Add it up to get your total variable costs, 840. Okay, we'll figure out the variance in a second. Moving on to fixed cost. Same thing, we're going to grab it from our static budget. So go back to your static budget for Barton Robotics. There it is. We said our fixed costs are down here. So 280, 70, and 50. Those don't change. 280, 70, and 50. And you can see they actually happen to be the same as our actual. So we did a really good job projecting those amounts, right? They were very on target there. Add it up. Total fixed cost. Add your variable and your fixed. You get 1,240,000. Now let's fill in our variance column. So let's take the difference. The difference here is 5,000. And we said that we're going to indicate with either a favorable or an unfavorable notation whether or not that variance increased or decreased net income. So think about it. So we had actuals come in lower. Actual costs were lower. If actual costs are lower, we said when actual costs are lower, that is a favorable variance. And I mentioned you can just note it with an F. You don't have to write out the entire word. Okay, here we have no variance. Here we have a variance of 3,000. And again, your actual expenses were less. All right, 8,000 favorable. There was no difference here. We did a great job projecting those fixed costs. So in total, we have an $8,000 variance, but it's favorable. So what does this flexible budget tell us? It tells us that we did an excellent job planning and projecting our fixed costs, right? We did some extensive research, made sure that, property taxes weren't going to increase. We didn't change our method of depreciation, right? Supervisors, if there were any salary increases, we made sure to include that in our projected figure here. So we did a lot of great research in projecting those fixed budgeted costs. And we did a great job controlling our actual variable costs, right? We thought it would be $25 per unit. Obviously, it was less. So we did a great job with that. Indirect labor was right on point, and then utilities came in just under. Okay, so this paints a very different picture from that static budget that said we were actually doing a poor job controlling our costs with this unfavorable variance. But of course, there's going to be a variance when your actual units are different from what you were expecting, because we know cost behavior alone will make up some of that difference. We need to isolate the volume and really look at what costs changed. And the only budget variance report that lets you do that is the flexible budget. So this, the actual versus the flexible budget, is the preferred budget for managers. It allows for greater control. Why? Because you have better visibility, right? We're able to isolate differences due to volume. Okay, not to say that this one should be completely thrown away. If you have a company with maybe their mode department or their production department relies heavily on fixed costs, then sure, use a static budget. You don't have to do the extra work to do a flexible budget if the majority of your costs are fixed, because then it's not going to matter if the units vary, right? Because fixed costs shouldn't change. So sure, there is a place for this, but most companies, they have variable and fixed costs, so they're going to see a greater benefit from using the actual versus flexible budget report. All right, so hopefully that was helpful for you. I'll make sure to post that template so that you can refer back to it for later problems or for your future quizzes. All right, bye.